So we're here to make apple pie. Apple pie is not an Italian dish, so it's a little out of my normal spectrum of foods that I usually cook, but I love pie. So I got some great apples the last day of the farmer's market, and I'm going to show you how I make my apple pie. And the thing about my apple pie is there is no sugar in it at all. But you don't notice the difference in it because of what I do to it, the spices I put in, the sweetness of the apples, and because I cook them a little bit just before I put them in. So let me show you. So first thing we're gonna do is I've got all these beautiful apples. Look at them. I got green ones and pink ones. And honestly, these were all a bunch of different apples that I don't remember what they were, but they all had different, there was some wine sap, that much I know. But I usually go to the farmer's market and just grab a couple of this one and a couple of that one. I like to mix up the apples. It's my favorite way to do it. Actually, here I'm peeling, and I have my nice bowl here to peel into so I don't make a mess. So anyway, so I like peeling with a paring knife, and a good paring knife is essential. So I prefer peeling with a knife, and I always kind of challenge myself to see, you know, sometimes I get in the mood and see if I can peel the whole apple in one, you know, one long piece, but then sometimes I don't. So sometimes I crack myself up. So anyway, so I'm going to peel a bunch of these apples. So I'm pretty quick at this. Okay, one a good apple. And we're going to do another one. This one's a different apple, so it's actually a little softer. That one was a crisper one. You can tell it's more tart just by the feel of the apple. Now, some people want to use a peeler, and that's totally fine. If you're good enough, you can get it nice and thin. It takes practice. But like I said, this kind of practice for me is a challenge. It's fun. You know you get apples from a farmer's market when they're funny shaped like this one. Because at the grocery store, all you get is perfectly shaped apples that all match. Then you wonder how they do that, because you know what? Real food isn't always the same shape and size. I'm gonna taste this one. That was good. You can't make an apple pie unless you're tasting the apples. You can't make anything unless you're tasting. I finished the last apple, so here we go. So now my peels aside, and we're gonna cut these babies up. So you can do this two ways, depending on what kind of mood I'm in and how hard the apples are. Sometimes I'll do them, you know, one piece at a time. Sometimes what I do is I actually sit in front of the television, and when I'm doing a whole bunch of them. All right, so I'm not gonna cut these in the long slivers. I'm gonna cut them in like medium pieces. I do them in, you know, the stereotypical apple pie way, but I like smaller bites, because when you go to bite into, when you go bite into a piece of apple pie, you tend to get this big piece of apple, and then all of a sudden the whole thing falls apart. So I like to make them a little bit smaller. Let me see that. One thing you do want to do is try to get them kind of somewhat evenly, you know, spaced. Now these pieces I save for later because this is my snack. So then I get into this and I clean them all off myself. Now the other way you can do it, of course, is you can take your big knife and do it this way, which is, you know, actually probably a little quicker and actually just as fun. So I've got all my apples all cut up, and they're all pretty uniform in size. One of the reasons, or another one of the reasons, I guess I should say, aside from cooking evenly and having bite-sized pieces in your pie, is that there's more surface area for the spices. So what I'm going to do now is dry my hands. All right, so what I'm going to do is put in my multitude of spices. So my number one spice is always cinnamon, and I'm pretty liberal. I don't have measurements for this. Do it how you like it and what it looks like. I'm going to show you what mine looks like. Do yours your way. No matter how much or how little you put in, it's going to taste good. But I always probably put double the cinnamon as to any other spice I put. So mostly cinnamon. Okay, that's probably the equivalent of a tablespoon and a half, I'm guessing. All right, and I like to mix it up because I like to have a nice coloring of cinnamon before I even put anything else in. Make sure that that's all mixed in. And look at how pretty that is. You know, already. Oh my gosh, I can smell the cinnamon. So there's a nice coating of cinnamon on every piece of apple in here. So my second favorite spice, I don't know if it's my second favorite spice, but my second one I put in here because it's my second favorite of this group is my nutmeg. You can buy ground nutmeg, but there is something about whole nutmeg that smells so good when you grind it. Take my little cover off or nothing's gonna go. So I usually do the nutmeg in one spot so I can see how much it is instead of going all around. And I usually do probably a good 1/2 to 3/4 of a nut. Now that I started with 3/4 of one now, so this is apples for what would be the equivalent of a few pies worth. I'm gonna probably cook down the rest of these apples and make applesauce. Okay, so that was about 3/4 of a nut because I really got it down to the last little piece. Okay. Then I put in just a pinch of cloves, ground cloves. So, well, let's see. So that was probably the equivalent of 1/2 teaspoon, maybe a little more. I like cloves. It's a strong spice, so you may or may not like as much. This is a little bit of allspice. I'm just going to do a little, one sprinkle across that one. And then the same thing with the ginger. Ground ginger. About, this one's coming out slower. I'm not putting a whole lot more. Okay, there we go. So those three, the nutmeg and the cinnamon are my two top ones. My allspice and my ginger are next, and the least amount is the cloves. That's just proportions. So don't worry about exact amounts. But when in doubt, go heaviest on the cinnamon. And then just mix them up. There's been times where I've been a little heavy-handed and I thought these are going to be really spicy and they're really dark. And you know what? They still come out amazing. The apples just suck it all up. More the merrier. All right, so you can see here how dark and coated all these apples are. If you see one that's still not coated, just stir it around a few more times, get them in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do with these now is I'm going to put them on the stove on low. The main reason I do that is because it sweats the apples a little bit, bringing out the natural sweetness, so you don't miss not putting sugar in here. No sugar at all in this pie, not in the crust and not in the filling, but you don't need it. It comes from the apples, and then the flavors of the spices really just make it all come together. All right, so these are on the stove. Just put them on. I'm going to put just a drop of water in. That was probably not even a 1/4 cup. Just enough to wet the bottom of the pan to get them started, get them steaming. Like I said, we're not cooking these long, we're just gonna sweat them out. Okay, so the apples are cooking and now we're gonna make some crust. So the first thing we need is 2 cups of flour, then it would be 2/3 cup butter, a teaspoon of salt, I usually just put like a big pinch, and then 6 tablespoons of ice water. So I've had my water sitting here with an ice cube in it, which is just melted, but it's ice and cold. So in the meantime, I'm gonna double this recipe right now because I'm gonna have some extra pie crust to do something else with. So we're gonna go with 4 cups of flour. But remember, it's 2 cups of flour, 2/3 cup butter, a good pinch of salt, and six or so tablespoons of water, as needed. Or QB, and they say in Italian, quanto bisogno. 1, 2, 3. You know what? I already measured this. I have a 50-pound bag of flour, so it's really kind of hard for me to put it up on the counter. So I measured out 4 cups. So there you go. So much for measuring. Anyway, now as far as butter is concerned, 2/3 cup butter, 1/3 cup is about 5 tablespoons. So the recipe calls for 10 tablespoons, which is 1 and like 1/3 of these sticks of butter. So anyway, what I usually do, move this over here for a minute, is I love my pastry cutter. And when you cut butter with a knife. Of course, I just did it too many times, and I've got lots of pieces of paper. And a little piece sitting on top there. I use this to cut, it like cuts through it like butter. Isn't that crazy? I cut it into little pieces. Now, ideally, you want your butter to be as cold as possible. This is pretty cold still. Before I mix this all up and add my pinch of salt, which I'm going to do now. So that's one, and then second recipe. Well, that first one was kind of late. Okay, there we go. But I'm going to check the apples. These are nice and just wet. Just shrunk down a little bit. That's all we want them to do. The apples I've just turned off, and now I'm going to mix this in. So I've got the flour and the salt, not sugar, and butter in here. So what I'm going to do first, with my hands, get in here and just start breaking up the butter and mush it up. This, to me, is one of my favorite things in the world. It's like velvet. I love getting my hands in the flour. Get all the butter pieces coated in flour, and most of the flour have some butter in it. Okay, now we're going to start with some of the ice water. So since I'm using a regular spoon, not a measuring spoon, we may end up with 6 or 7 instead of 6, but anyway, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Since we doubled this, I'm putting 6 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to stop one short because you never know how your butter or your flour is on any given day. The air, the weather, the time of year, who you're making the pie for, that determines how it all comes out. So we start with one short and then add as you need, because you don't want it to be a wet dough. You want it to be just wet enough to stick together. All right, so now I'm going to dump it out on the counter. So that I can gently bring this all together. Again, without smushing up all the butter. We don't want to over knead this, so we're just bringing it together. Okay. Now you might think when you're putting in just those 6 tablespoons of water that it's not enough if it seems so dry. It's still a little bit tacky. It's just dry enough. And you can still see the flecks of butter in the dough. That's what you want. See this beautiful ball of dough? I love it. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to cut this in half, because half of this is going to be for our pie right now, and half of this I'm going to wrap up in plastic and save for another day. I just put my 1 ball of dough in the refrigerator. Now I'm going to wrap up my other piece in plastic. And let this set for a few minutes, let it rest, while I just real quick clean off my surface, because I want to roll that pie here. Okay, so let's get a piece of wax paper. Let's unwrap our rested dough. Now what I'm going to do with this rested dough is I'm going to cut it in half, because this is the bottom and the top of the pie. So we're going to cover up the pieces we're not using so it doesn't dry out. We're going to do this. Oops. I'm going to get just a little flour out of my 50-pound bag sitting next to my counter. Just going to put a little teeny bit here. I'm going to squash this down to a little disc. A little bit of flour on top, just so it doesn't stick to my rolling pin. I'm going to get the little rolling pin, the big ones like this. But okay, so we're going to roll it and then turn it. That's a little sticky. There we go. There we go. So just roll in try to keep it, into a big circle. You always want to roll from the middle out, so don't be afraid of rolling a pie crust. I know so many people afraid of rolling a pie crust. Just roll from the middle and push it out gently. Just don't give it extra oomph when you get to the edge, because when you get to the edge, if you go too hard, it will get too thin at the edges. So when you get to the edges, just kind of lighten up on the rolling pin. In fact, don't even go all the way to the edge, because when you turn it, you'll get it straight that way. Now, even when it feels like it's thin, it's a thick crust. Usually by the time it gets to the edges of your wax paper, you've got a good enough size piece of crust. So here's your standard pie plate. And all you do is pick this whole thing up, turn it over, make sure it's kind of even, and pull it off. You can do this with wax paper or parchment paper or even plastic wrap. A lot of people do it with plastic wrap. So the plastic wrap, if you're making lots of pies, doesn't break down like wax paper. You do a couple pies and it gets a little bit damp, but I can get a couple out of this. Okay, so now first thing I do is make sure it's down into the corners of the pan, the plate, and then I get my little fork. I'm gonna poke some holes. Do you know why we poke the holes? I always love poking the holes. I don't know why. Some people even do the sides. You don't really need to, but it's fun. So I do sometimes. Okay, I'm gonna get my scissors. Oh, here's one of them. I'm gonna trim my edges very carefully. Leave some hanging over. So just cut those big odd pieces so that it's relatively even going around, but still hanging over the edge. And then with all these pieces, if you have a little spot that has a hole in it, or here, you take the extra piece and you glue it on. There you go. It's already flat and rolled out, so you fill out your spots. That's how you have a nice, even top crust. Once you've got that, see, nothing to be afraid of, everything can be fixed. So then I take what's a little bit of overhang I have, and I just fold it under. Some people just fold it under like this and kind of make it real rustic looking, and that's fine too. You can do what I usually do, the pinch one. So you can use a finger or thumb and to pinch on the outside, but I usually do finger. Okay, so now that we've trimmed our pie, we're going to put that aside for 1 second while I go get the apples, which have sufficiently cooled down. Actually, I don't know why I'm putting it aside. Look at these beautiful apples. So I'm going to stir them up because some of that sauce on the bottom is apple juice. Yeah. Okay, look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? Oh God, they smell so good. So we're going to fill this pie up nice. So you can fill it up as high as you want. I don't necessarily like them overfilled. I like them kind of to the top of the pan filled. Otherwise it makes it too hard to close the crust. Okay, nice and even. And I've got enough in here for at least another pie or some darn good applesauce. Okay, now I'm going to put that aside. Take my wax paper out again. Put a little bit more flour on it. Start with the disc. Oops, might help do it that way. There we go. Again, we're trying to get a circle here. Now there's different tops for an apple pie. A lot of people put a solid top on. I think that's boring. All right, this doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to cut it up in pieces. Okay. And I could do this in one big one like I did the bottom, but I tend to be obnoxious and do it in smaller pieces. Okay, so the fun part now comes with me going in my big drawer and getting my cool pastry cutter. You can do these in skinny strips, you can do them in fat strips, maybe like an inch, inch and a half, something like that. Some are good, some are perfect, some aren't. I don't care about perfection, it tastes perfect. Okay, so we're going to take these pieces off. I always take my longest piece, put it across the middle, and my other longest piece, and put it across the other middle. And then take the next one and put it over here. If you can see this, back up a little. And then this one is a smaller one that's going to go over there. But now, how do we get the crisscross? So let me show you. Let's roll out another piece. Again, remember, always out from the middle. So I only actually need a couple more strips here, and then whatever's left, I'll tell you what you can do with it. All right, a couple more strips. What we do is this. Take the middle one, fold it back. Put your other piece on, and put it back. Take your middle one from this side, and put your piece on, and boom, done. Now, the extras we'll worry about later. So now we're just gonna trim off these longer pieces. Actually, these are pretty perfect. Now we're gonna take the sides and roll them in. Because now we've got a little bit of thickness from what we did before, and now we're just gonna roll it into the pieces of the strips to tie them together. And that's it. Now, if you want to make it really look pretty, happen to be lucky enough to still have some egg whites, and brush the top. You don't have to do this. It looks fine, rustic-y, plain. This adds just a little extra sheen and color to it. Doesn't matter if it gets on the apples. And then just take a little bit around the edges. This is where other people sprinkle sugar on top. I don't. This is it. So we've got a pie crust with no sugar, apples with no sugar, topping with no sugar. This is what it looks like now, and in a little bit you'll see what it looks like when we take it out of the oven. Here's my cool apple pie. Want to see? Let's see if I can drop it. Okay, so we have a beautiful looking apple pie that I personally think tastes as good as it looks. We're not going to eat it right now because it is hot, but this is what you get. And I hope that you like my sugarless apple pie. It's not sugarless for any other reason initially, was because I thought it tasted better. And of course, when I was making things for my kids, I wanted things to be healthier. And I found that it tasted just as good this way. Way back when, I kept lessening the sugar until it was none. So you can do the same thing. Any fruit pie. I make the pies the same exact way with apple, peaches, strawberries. Those are my top 3 favorites. As far as fruit pies, those are my personal favorites. It's a piece of fruit and a crust with lots of flavor. So I hope you enjoy it. Please try it, and please let me know if you like it, if kids liked it, if your family liked it. Let me know on the bottom of this video what your thoughts are. And please, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and hope to see you on there more often. See you later. Ciao.